So my name's Jessica DeJong. I'm the managing director of our design group. At One North, that includes visual design, brand design, product design, motion design, and front-end development. And today, I have the fun topic of risk. And we're going to talk about how taking creative risks can empower your business for long-term success. So there's lots I could talk about with risk. A lot of these are heavy. I have this coveted after lunch speaking slot, so we're not going to talk about any of the really heavy ones. We're going to spend about 40 minutes talking about creative risks. I've been fascinated with creative risks since I joined One North about 10 years ago. When we started, most of our clients were large global law firms. I know we have a couple law firm clients in the room today, and you will appreciate that when you're trying to sell design work to the smartest lawyers in the world, that's going to be a tough sell. So I feel like I cut my teeth selling design work to the most risk-averse population of stakeholders maybe you could ever imagine. You know, their job is to mitigate risk and to rely on precedent and avoid the unfamiliar. And my job is to sell design work to them and make them comfortable with the uncomfortable. So anyways, this talk was therapy for me to write. So my talk today is going to have 3 parts. The first is how do you set up and embrace a culture that fosters risk-taking. Part 2 is how do you balance that risk with business realities and still make a profit. And then part 3, we're going to tie it all together, and I'm going to hopefully give you some tactical things you can do to introduce and infuse design risks in the right moments. So we're going to start with a story that is outside of web, outside of product, outside of design, really. And it's about an organization that I feel really embodies this embracing of a culture of creative risks. And they ask the question, what if we? And so I think that's a really good sort of mantra for this portion of my talk. Who knows what this is? I know you know Kat. I know you know Olive. This is a balloon, but you guys probably knew that. It's also an edible balloon, and they serve it at Alinea, which is a really high-end restaurant in Chicago. It's been one of the best restaurants in the world for about 10 years, and it's run by Chef Grant Achatz. And about 10 years ago, who's seen Chef's Table? It's on a Netflix show. Good, okay. Highly recommend it if you need a movie for the plane ride home. And one of the episodes, so Chef's Table follows different chefs around the world. And the episode about Grant Achatz, there's this scene where he's sitting around the table with some of his other chefs, and he poses the question to them, what if we made food that floats? And he says, or what if we made food that's invisible? And it was such a cool moment that he was sort of putting this idea out there, and he was asking them, like, could we do it? And one of the chefs raised his hand and said, I'll do it, chef. And the next couple minutes of the episode, they're in the test kitchen and they're using all these different ingredients and trying different recipes. Some are failing, and they finally get this sugar paste and they use a helium tank. This is actually, his face is unfortunately obscured. This is the chef that actually created it with Grant Achatz. And so they made the sugar paste, and the string is made of an edible green apple. And it becomes this signature dish, and it's dessert. They share it at the end, and they did it. So they made food that floats, and they made food that's invisible. Hopefully this video loads. You can see when they bring the balloons out at the end of the meal, so it is filled with helium. Everybody's eating it, and you're not really sure what to do, and then everybody's voice starts to sound a little funny because there's helium in it. There's no sound on this on purpose. You're not missing anything. Here's how they make it with the sugar paste. And it's this sort of unexpected, joyful ending, bookend to the meal that's 26 courses or something like that. And I just thought this was so cool. And what struck me about this scene in Chef's Tables was what he didn't say. So he didn't say, what if we made food that floats, but you have to serve it tonight? Sales probably, but not your sales team bill. That was just a cheap joke, so. And then there's always somebody that doesn't understand how much something like this would cost. They have no clue. How much would that cost? It's just air anyways. Probably finance. We've all got stakeholders like this. And then there's the Eeyores, What if we made food that floats and nobody orders it, or someone's allergic to it, and somebody will just copy it anyways, we probably shouldn't do it. And so all of those are valid, and those are details that do need to be sorted out, but not in that moment where you're asking your team, what if we made food that floats, right? That's not the time to ask those questions. And so if we focus too early on what could go wrong, you miss out on what could go right. And this balloon really went right for Alinea. Truthfully, I probably could have done this portion of the talk about any of their dishes. They're all that imaginative. But anyways, it's a huge success. Alinea has been awarded 3 Michelin stars, I think, for the last 10 or 12 years. Grant Achatz has become a celebrity chef. Here he is on the cover of a magazine with the balloon. Here's, just a listing of the awards. So it's a huge success. And I'm just very interested in the culture around that type of risk-taking and how it's related to that success. They've since branched out. There's other brands. They even have, they're the ones that started Talk, if you ever use that reservations app where you buy tickets ahead of time. This is the group that came up with that. But I think the best illustration of what this culture of risk-taking can do is what happened to them in 2020 during the pandemic. And so I think we all remember restaurants were shutting down left and right. It was a really tough time for many industries, but the food industry in particular, but not for Alinea. If you look at the dates of these 2 articles, the one on the left is March 19th, the one on the right is April. They immediately pivoted. They had different food than they normally would serve, no to-go balloons, but they had all these to-go meals ready, and it was super meticulously planned. You had a 5-minute window, you drove up, they gave you your food, you took it home. And so I think the important part here is the balloon is cool. I hope to have the balloon someday. But it's this culture that values strategic and creative risk-taking. It makes you nimble. It makes you ready to pivot in those moments of change. And I think we all know change is almost the only guarantee we have going forward. And so I just love this example. So I referenced this earlier. I have a sad story. During rehearsals for this talk, the team was asking me, have you done the balloon? Have you had it? I have not. And when my husband and I first moved to Chicago, it was 15 years ago, we actually lived on Halsted. We lived down the street from where Alinea is. And we always walked by it, and we thought, one day we're going to eat dinner there. And so for our 10-year wedding anniversary, we bought tickets on April 18th, 2020, months in advance, like you're supposed to. And then we got the email that it was, unfortunately shut down. So I have not had the Alinea balloon yet. But a third of my talk is about it. So I thought, to be authentic, to really be a good speaker about this, I need to go. So I asked Jen, and she said, no. Someday I'll get there. So that's enough about my first world problems, not eating at Alinea. Another thing that I thought was important in just doing research about Alinea in this example is part of risk-taking is accepting that failure is part of this process. They're not all, there was failure within the process of developing the balloon, but they even get stuff on the floor that's not a resounding success. And they, make the occasional misstep. So during the pandemic, when you could go back to the restaurant, they sort of made this tongue-in-cheek, dish. They served it, widely panned, quickly got that off the menu. So, that's not the story. That's not the picture you see on the front of magazines. It's the picture of the balloon. It's the picture of the success. But I think we have to accept that you get a couple duds when you're shooting for the stars. And so I like to think of failure in the creative process sort of like the stock market, right? It's not a smooth linear trajectory up. There are going to be some dips, but hopefully you learn more in the dip that allows you to rebound, and the general trajectory is in the right direction. So when we're thinking about the theme of this and we're thinking about the long view, this is how I see the creative process sort of playing out long term. So a quick note on learning the rules before you break them. Grant Achatz didn't make the balloon when he was 22 and fresh out of chef's school. So for the first decade of his career, he apprenticed with two also very accomplished chefs, Charlie Trotter on the left, Thomas Keller on the right. He gets into, so Thomas Keller's head chef at the French Laundry in California, and he talks about their very different leadership styles. I'll leave it at that. I'll let you know Grant Achatz' first child is named Keller, so I think he really respected his mentor on the right. And I'll leave you to fill in the gaps of the mentor on the left. And he talks about when he flew out to California, he wanted to work at this restaurant at the French Laundry. He walked in and there was a guy mopping the floor, and he said, "Do you know where Chef Keller is? I want to work here." And he said, I'm Chef Keller. And he was mopping the floor of the restaurant there. And so, a lot of us lead teams, and I think about, what type of leader we want to be. That's the type of leader I want to be. So anyways, my point in that story is that he studied with the best of the best before he started taking risks. He really mastered all the elements of fine cooking. So I'm going to put up, sorry for the light nudity, I'm going to put up 3 early pieces by an artist I'm sure you all know. Does anybody know who did these pieces? No? So this was some of his very early work. We'll move to a more famous piece. So this is a bull in the, more accurate depiction, and then broken down into its very elemental cubist representation. So if you haven't guessed by now, the artist at the beginning was actually Picasso. That was Picasso's early work. Picasso didn't start out Picassoing, right? He started out studying all the different mediums that artists do. And when I look at these two pieces, obviously they're very different, but the understanding of color, look at the use of red in both of them, the layout, the mastery of layout and where your eye is drawn, you don't get to the Picasso on the right without starting with the Picasso on the left. And so I think you do need to, I wanted to acknowledge, you need to master those rules and the fundamentals before you just start breaking stuff. So how do you build an environment that embraces this risk but isn't just, chaos and keeps people accountable to performance? I mean, we all have businesses to run. So, this has been a popular book. I'm sure a couple of you have read it. And Adam Grant in this book, he talks a lot about psychological safety, which is definitely a buzzword, but an often misunderstood one. So it doesn't mean you're just nice or you relax standards. You do still have to keep people accountable. And so a bunch of us leaders at One North went to a conference last year, and the speaker was talking about psychological safety, and I really like what he said about it. He said, psychological safety is when your team strives to do their best work, but it's because they feel safest when you're in the room. If they're not motivated by fear, they feel safe and encouraged by you, and that's what drives them to do their best work. So I think about that, too, in leading teams. So in the book, he talks about 2 different types of culture. There's performance culture and there's learning culture. Performance culture focused on short-term gains and immediate outcomes. This will echo some of the themes we've heard from Dory Clark and other speakers today. Performance cultures are very risk-averse, and they're rethinking averse. So they're going to keep going in the direction they're going, and they're not going to rethink those positions. Versus a learning culture that is much more focused on long-term gains, and they're a lot more patient for those outcomes. Think about Kevin's talk about brand and how far out you end up reaping those dividends. Learning cultures encourage risk and learning from mistakes, and they regularly engage in rethinking. It's a part of the culture. And so in the book, there's this really great example, another non-design example, this one in the medical field. So Adam Grant and his researchers looked at 2 teams, and they evaluated them for psychological safety. One team had much lower standards of psychological safety. The other team had much higher psychological safety. And they wanted to see which team resulted in a higher incidence of medical errors. So this is fairly objective, more so than some of my other examples. And I think we all know what they probably hoped they would find or expected to find, but that's not really what they found. They found that team 2, so this is the team with lower psychological safety, actually had a significantly lower number of errors. This was surprising to them, so they thought about the research design, and what they realized, Team 2 just had a lower incidence of self-reported errors. So they redesigned the research, and they had a third-party expert go in and observe both teams in action. And of course, what they found was, when evaluated by someone else, Team 1 had a much lower incidence of errors in the medical field. They were just more comfortable reporting them, which means they learned from them. They could pass those learnings on to their teams and not remake those same mistakes. So I definitely want Team 1 treating me in a medical setting. I don't know about you guys. All right, so that's the end of sort of part 1 here. So just to recap, my key takeaways here: a culture of risk-taking is going to make you ready to adapt to curveballs, and we know they will come. Key takeaway 2, failure is part of the creative process, so we've got to accept that. Before you break the rules, you need to master them. And finally, this is supposed to be fun. The balloon is a symbol of joy. It's a symbol of happiness. Everybody's happier with a balloon. And so, we're talking here about design risks and creative risks, so let's not forget how cool it is that is our job. All right, so now I want to pivot to a different example, a little closer to design, but this time more in the fashion luxury goods world, and this concept around radical innovation and profitable creativity. So we still are designing, not doing art. Thank you, Kalev, for the quote. And so we're going to look at LVMH, the large conglomerate of luxury goods. They've got, I think, 30-some brands under their umbrella, some of the more recognizable ones, of course, Tiffany, Dom, Louis Vuitton. Household names, star brands is what they call them. And so I was really interested in how they have all these home runs under one parent brand. And so I did a little research on the CEO, Bernard Arnault. Probably pronouncing that wrong. Kalev will correct me later. He is typically one of the wealthiest men in the world. Not that that is a measure of success, but it does prove that his methods can still result in business success. And I really liked this quote that he says: "You can't charge a premium for giving people what they expect. And you won't ever have breakout products that way, the kind that people line up around the block for. We have those, but it's because we give our artists freedom." I would swap out the word artists for designers, but because these designers do want to get their products onto shelves. So I have a cool story about one of his designers. So this is a photo from the runway in 2000. This is when John Galliano was the creative director at Dior. I know it was John Galliano because he put his face on the jacket, typical creative director. And he sent people out, he sent his models out on the runway with outfits made of newsprint, actual newsprint. And his quote, Bernard Arnault's quote was, "I was shocked," which is good, of course. A new product is not creative, it's not important if it does not shock you when you first see it. I say a version of this to our clients, not in these words, but I usually say, like if we're doing a website design, we'll give them a couple options. One is a little safer, one is a little bit more out there, one's sort of a happy medium. I usually counsel clients, pick the one that makes you a little bit uncomfortable today, because we're gonna have to develop it and you're gonna have 10 months of looking at it, and by the time it launches, you're gonna be more comfortable with it. All these examples, the balloon, the newsprint dress, in retrospect, they feel less risky, but at the time, that was probably a really brave, courageous thing to send out on the runway. So the newsprint dress sort of has an interesting story. If you're a fashion follower, you might be a little bit more familiar with it. So that was the runway, and then a year or two later, Sarah Jessica Parker's character wears it in Sex and the City, and it becomes an iconic dress. Even today, celebrities are still wearing the newsprint. And fast fashion brand Zara has, mass-produced it now for everybody. And if you read the interview with Bernard Arnault, he never thought it would get this far. He just thought he was letting his creative director send models out to the runway with newsprint dresses on. But it actually resulted in a commercial success they couldn't have predicted. So when you look at the creative process at LVMH, there's two important sections to it. The first is the very beginning, and he calls it radical innovation. And this is where he talks about you need to respect the necessary chaos early. And they do focus groups, but they only listen to one ear at this part. And then as the design process progresses and you move over to when you're starting to execute on it, they banish chaos. And this is where you get into profitable creativity. And he talks about how strict the discipline is that they enact in their manufacturing processes. The Louis Vuitton Never Full bag that I had up there has 1,000 steps to it, all done by hand. But it is meticulously planned, everybody knows what they're doing, and it's profitable. And so I think this approach shows that you can balance radical innovation and profitable creativity. And so you can have both. And he talks, at the radical innovation part, he said, no creative director wants somebody standing over them with a calculator, wondering how much is this going to cost, when are you going to be done? But he does acknowledge you have to figure that out at some point. And so, they've been a wildly successful company. Their profits and sales continue to go up. And so I was curious, how do they do this across all these different brands? And I'm giving you a percentage here because this is what he quotes. And I know Kevin gave a percentage of how often you should take risk, and Dory Clark mentioned the 80-20 at Google. I think the key here, so at Louis Vuitton, at LVMH, every year they have 15% of their products that are new and wild and creative and risky. And then the other 85% are tried and true products you could have bought this year, you could have bought 10 years ago, and you can probably buy again 5-10 years from now. And so this is how they sort of balance the portfolio risk that they have while still giving their artists or designers that creative freedom, and it allows them to sort of push all the brands forward. So back to these 3 products, for this talk, I wanted to go find the examples. What are the 15%? Where are they taking risks here? For Tiffany, I actually found, this must have been a year ago, they released a limited edition crypto NFT charms here. You could buy them for, I think they have the price at the end of this, it was 30 Ether, NFTIF. I bet somebody's really proud of that name they came up with. Thank God they didn't produce a ton of those, right? I mean, we saw in Kevin's talk how that sort of ended. For Dom, for some champagne, you have the normal nice bottle, and then this is a Lady Gaga limited edition that they did. I was Googling this to find the right image, and they are selling for, the scarcity of these, because it was just the 15% that one year, it is really difficult to find these. They sell at a premium, and so you kind of get the best of both. You've balanced the risk, but then you've made your brand that much cooler and relevant. And then for Louis Vuitton, for the bags, this was, I think Marc Jacobs was the creative director this year, and he had this idea to do graffiti in neon ink color on Louis Vuitton bags. Totally different than the standard monogrammed bag that you see women carrying around, but very cool, and again, selling on eBay and other sort of resale marketplaces for a lot. So they were able, these are just examples of how they're able to balance that risk in their portfolio. So my key takeaways from these examples, embrace the early chaos. It's part of the process. It might be uncomfortable, or you might have stakeholders that are uncomfortable. That's okay. Reassure them you will apply strict discipline when you get to the execution phase. Take risks with a small percentage, 15%, of your portfolio. Balance that risk out with tried and true. And then finally, bringing it back to the first part of my talk about Alinea, he has fostered, as CEO of this group, a culture that embraces risk-taking. It is part of their model, it is part of their process, it's why people go to work there. And so I don't want to lose that culture piece here, because I think that's really important for long-term success. All right, section 3. So those are all cool examples. We got the balloons, we got champagne, bags. What does this mean for everybody in this room? How can we take these lessons and apply them to our roles? So I have 4 sort of key recommendations for you. 1 is identify your 15%. I have some specific examples there. 2 is think outside the box. I know that's cliche. It'll make sense when I get there. 3 is limit your stakeholders. And 4 is get a coach. Don't go out and try to do this alone. So number 1, identifying your 15%. Let's make this real and talk about digital design, product design, the stuff that my team does and the stuff that your teams do. I think color and type are great areas to test something a little bit bolder. And you don't even have to use them all the time. It's great to have a color in your palette that is a little bit unexpected and you can deploy it for different reasons. Same with your type system. Have your typefaces that are tried and true and work in 85% of scenarios, but then if you have a campaign or you need something a little bit more exciting, it's nice to infuse some unexpected risk in the type system. Shorter lived materials, so campaigns, microsites, anything that appears on social, that's going to be there and gone quicker than you probably want it to be. All those really sort of shorter shelf life executions are great places to try, fail early, fail fast, learn from them, pivot to the next iteration. And finally, video and motion. I have a couple examples I want to show you because I feel like this is an area of visual design or brand design that I don't see a lot of brands fully layering in yet. And even if you didn't do, infuse risk in any of these other categories, you could take your existing brand today and add in some unexpected motion, and that still communicates something. So I have a couple examples. We didn't do any of these. I found them. They were inspirational. So Nordstrom Rack recently rebranded. Type system is cool. It's chunky. They've got energetic colors. But what I thought was cool was the motion in this video. Like this really separates Nordstrom from Nordstrom Rack. It has a vibe to it, and it's a very digitally native brand interpretation. You get the personality from the motion, and it is reinforced by the type and the color choices. And it's responsive, so you see how it kind of moves around, and you can imagine how that would translate to social or smaller screens. So I thought that was a cool example. Here's another great example. This is an ad campaign for different cities in the Netherlands. These ads showed up primarily in different transit stations, so you hear a train station, and I'll play them. The visual expression is very simple. It's just a condensed typeface, simple black and white colors with one punctuated color choice, but the way it moves and flexes, that would be arresting. That would stop you if you were running to catch a train. And so I use these examples because I think they're a new, fresh way to add in something unexpected to your brand, visual brand. Wanted to have a relevant example while we're here in Utah, and so I found this example for the Utah Jazz. Now, this is not their identity system. This was a separate identity system for the playoffs. I don't know what year, but it was just used for that, and this was probably a couple years ago because metallics, highly reflective materials were really popular then. They add motion in a cool way. You see it come in and out. Their uniforms don't look like this today, but it was a cool sort of way to push the envelope in a concentrated, shorter shelf life execution. All right, so those are just some ideas for the 15% you can find to have some fun with and take some risks. Number 2, think outside the box. I said this was cliche. Do you all know this brain teaser, this exercise? So there's 9 dots here. And the exercise is you have 4 lines. Without picking up your pencil, you need to connect every dot. Most people, the first time you try to do this, can't get it done because the end solution is you have to extend the lines outside the boundary. Now, it's not a limitation that's ever communicated that you have to stay within the square shape of the dots, but it's a perceived limit that almost everybody, the first time they do this, assumes. And so I use this example because I think a lot of times we don't want to take a risk or we perceive a limit that's not even there. And if we get out of our own way or just think creatively about the solution, it paves the way, it smooths the friction for taking a risk. So I have another example. Who's seen Air, the new movie, couple hands? It's a fun watch. I don't think it's totally accurate. And there's lots of different risks that I could have used in that movie, but the one I liked was a design-specific risk, and this was about the actual design of the first Air Jordan. So this is the first Air Jordan. At the time, the NBA had a uniformity rule, and so all the players' shoes had to be more than 51% white. They had to match all of their teammates' shoes, and failure to follow this resulted in $5,000 fine per game. And so in the movie, they're working with the shoe designer, And they say, what if we made it the Chicago Bulls color, like black and red? And he's like, no, you can't do that because it's $5,000 fine. And they're like, what if we just pay the fine? And so which is what they ended up doing, and it's a great example of viewing that perceived limit as either a roadblock or an opportunity. And they marketed off this. They had a campaign around the banned shoe. I mean, they got more leverage out of it than they would have had they just said, well, that's $5,000 per game, we can't do it. I don't know how much they ended up spending on those games, but I do know that the sales of the Air Jordan in year one were $162 million. So that risk definitely paid off. And if we're thinking about the long-term impact of that decision, this revolutionized Nike in basketball as a brand, probably one of the most iconic shoe lines ever. And it was all because somebody took a design risk and got over that imaginary hurdle. All right, number 3, limit your stakeholders. So I think this is probably something all of us can appreciate in this room, trying to do something cool, and you've got somebody coming in, raining on your parade. And so I have a graph. I know the strategy team had a lot of cited graphs earlier this morning. Mine is not annotated, not cited, because this is my own anecdotal observation. I have observed the coolness of your end design is inversely related to the number of stakeholders you have weighing in. I'm sure a lot of you, based on the chuckles, will agree with me. But I understand the reality of you can't just have 3 people shepherd a new design in, a new brand, a new website, a new product, whatever it is. I hear this in every kickoff meeting. I've got to include this group. Marketing wants to be included, legal needs to be included, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. There is a way to handle this, but you have to time it right. And so since Kalev quoted me, I'm going to quote Kalev. He taught me this probably the first year I joined One North, and he was coaching me on how to work with these lawyers. I was so intimidated and scared. And he said, well, include them early. If you just ask them at the end of the process, the only way they can meaningfully contribute is to criticize what you've done. With a cooking example or a baking example, you don't want to bake a cake and as it's coming out of the oven, ask the recipient, do you like chocolate? That's not the time to get that feedback. You need to know that much sooner in the process. Now, they shouldn't tell you how to bake the cake, right? That's what we're experts in. But you need to know that vision early before you decide to make a chocolate cake. And so what we do at One North is we typically will ask in a kickoff, who needs to be included, who needs their voice heard, and let's figure out a way to include them in a way that is meaningful and not disruptive to the design process. So typically what that means is we ask for their involvement early in the form of like a workshop, interviews, focus group, surveys. It will allow those stakeholders to voice what they want, they will feel heard, and then hopefully they will get out of the way and let the experts do the work. So we'll go back to this graph, scientifically accurate. And I have an example, not shaming any of these companies. I tried to block out their logos, but you can probably figure out. These are 4 very national insurance brands. If I quizzed you, you probably wouldn't know which one is which. They're all using blue. If you do the squint test, they all look pretty much the same. These are very low-risk designs, I would say, and I know exactly how they got here. They probably had 50 people that had to sign off on this, if not more. And so when you contrast this with the new kid on the block, Lemonade, their homepage looks totally different. You see the little subtle animations, little moments of delight there, totally different color palette, just black and white. They do use this magenta color just to punctuate areas they want to draw your attention to. One call to action, one new piece in the nav up there. Their use of pink was so famous that they actually got sued by T-Mobile, which said they had a patent on the pink. Ended up being pretty good press for them. Lemonade still has pink in their palette. You can't own a color. Was the end result of this. So they got free press out of it. They definitely stand out in the marketplace. And so with this example, the pink is their 15%, right? Their type system, their design, their other elements of their visual brand are not rocking the boat. But, they leaned into this one. And so I encourage you to do that. Number 4, get a coach. I think this is all really hard to do alone, especially when you're in it, in the trenches with your team. This is not just any coach, this is my coach from college, used to be a runner. And so I want to tell you all about this workout that we did. It was famous, they still do it, it's called the Michigan. And so what you do is you run a mile, 1,600 at race pace. So like almost as fast as you can go, but you still have a couple more things to do. Then you do 1,000 meters tempo, which is a little bit slower than that, but you're still running a lot of fast things. Then you do a half mile, 800 race pace, another 1K tempo, and then you finish with the 400, and it's just whatever you have. People are falling, it's, you leave it all out there. And the first time I did this workout as a freshman, I PR'd in the mile. Before I did the rest of this, PR's personal record. So I ran faster in that mile than I had ever before, and then I finished the workout. So when I finished that 400, I had PR'd, which I guess is a common thing, a lot of freshmen do that. And I ran the rest of it. I was, we're all trying to catch our breath, we're exhausted. And I remember my coach, Mike, came in and he said, we're not done. You've got 4 more 150s, so just like sprints around the track and you get a little rest in between them. I mean, we were on the ground, we did not think we could keep going. He had run this workout dozens of times before, he'd seen dozens of athletes do it, and he knew we had a little bit more we could give. There was a little more outside our comfort zone he could push us. There's no way if I had been doing that workout by myself, I would have tried to do anything but sort of walk off the track and stretch and cool down. And so what I think is important here is you realize if you're the athlete or the coach in this situation, if you're the athlete, if you're doing the work with your team, you need someone else who believes in you to push you just a little bit, whether it's a executive sponsor, a new hire that can breathe some new life and sort of push you past your comfort zone. Often we play that role. We're sort of an outside third party. We can come in and have a different perspective, have that long view, know what's been done before, but you just can't do it alone. I never would have gotten to this if I was just doing a workout by myself on the track. All right, so now to bring this all together, just some parting thoughts, and then I have a fun activity to wake everybody up after lunch. So these were sort of the 3 examples we used, and the key takeaways I want everyone to remember. Creative innovation requires time to blossom. That cake takes a while to bake, and it will make your business more resilient and adaptable to whatever curveballs we're going to get thrown in the future. And then remember the newsprint dress. You can balance radical innovation with profitable creativity by following that 85-15 model. And then finally, remember the think outside the box exercise. Remember the Air Jordans. What limits do you have that are just perceived and they're not even there? Or they're there, but with a little creative solutioning, you can get past that. You can push through that. And so think about all the cool risks that I talked about. We talked about, what if we made food that floats? What if we made food that's invisible? What if we made a dress from newsprint? What if we just paid the NBA fine? And so I'm going to push everyone here to think of your own risk. And I'd like everyone to take a Sharpie and write down a risk that you want to take this year that's going to pay long-term dividends. And then what I want you to do, thank you, assistants. So Ryan and I were talking about this activity, and he gave me this really interesting visualization exercise. If there's something you're nervous about or stressed about, he taught me you can sort of picture yourself putting this thing, this idea, in a balloon, writing it down, sending it out into the world. And just the visualization of getting that balloon out there is very freeing, and it reduces all the anxiety and stress you may have around that. So I want everyone to pretend that I brought Alinea balloons here, and I want you to think about what risk could you take. It could be a design risk, it could be a strategy risk, it can be whatever you want. But I want you to think big about something that if you had the courage to do it now, it would pay long-term dividends.